Welcome back to the UFL YouTube channel. I'm your host, Owen, and today we are going to be doing, in honor of the season kicking off on Saturday, March 30th, my first official UFL Power Rankings. And if you don't know, the UFL is the combination of the XFL and the USFL. It is now 8 teams, 4 from each previous league, which are going to be divided into the conferences, kind of like how the NFL-AFL merger worked. And kind of say real quick, thank God for that, because I had to outsource to my old collaborator, Christian, to do the USFL Power Rankings when I did the XFL Power Rankings, because I was just totally footballed out by the time the third consecutive football league started that spring with the USFL. Now everything is put together, and it's just one league where I can do these power rankings, and it'd be kind of more concise, and I'm able to actually watch all the games and be knowledgeable about everything, because the USFL guys, to be honest with you, I had to do a lot more research to figure out who was where what. Also, I just think it's better because you had the two leagues that had some good players and some bad players, and so some teams suffered. Now you're putting them all together, and you have 8 teams that are going to be able to pull from both those pools of players at the same time. So in these power rankings, and which is going to be also just like the official preview breakdown of the season, so you can know who to root for, who's going to be good, who's going to be bad kind of thing. You're going to hear a lot of words like XFL's first team XFL, first team USFL, on all of these teams. They're going to have these players who maybe they were for them the previous time when they played for them were on these all-league teams, or were added from other teams or the all-league or teams. They were on previous teams and they got added to these teams because of the previous teams those players played for no longer exist. So take this as a twofold preview for the entire season and all the players that are going to be participating, as well as just my rankings for the teams without any knowledge, because as soon as the first games are played, this thing can be turned on its head completely. But without further ado, let's just get right into it with our 8th ranked team, the San Antonio Brahmas. Now, the Brahmas were not a great team for the XFL. They're lucky to have stayed in it and not been the worst team with the Orlando Guardians taking that mantle. And they kind of did an entire overhaul. They lost Coach Hines Ward. They're starting offense basically with quarterback Jack Cohn. Starting running backs like Kalen Ballage are all gone, and they kind of have a new look when it comes to the team, and it's not really looking that great for them when it comes to what they're going to be doing this season in the UFL. They added all XFL players, tight end Cody Lattimore, who was one of the top receivers in XFL last season, as well as center Alex Millette and D-tackle Kavion Patton. Their starting quarterback, they already announced it. Some of these teams are keeping it vague for opening weekend, but they announced that starting quarterback Chase Garbers, who was formerly of the Cal Bears, got a little spell as a preseason quarterback for the Raiders this past season, was named their starter over who they took in the first overall pick in the kind of redispersal draft of the talent of the XFL. Quarterback Quentin Dormady was who they took first overall there from the Guardians, who was the quarterback for the Guardians, who got them their one and only win last season against the best team in the league at the time, the DC Defenders. So, I mean, the Guardians never really had any good quarterbacks, so Quentin Dormady is like the best of the worst. So I'm not surprised he didn't get the start, but they're going with the youth and Chase Garbers. He was kind of floated as a day 3 pick in this past draft cycle, so I think he might be kind of a little bit of an upside there over a guy like Quentin Dormady, who what you've got in him. It's not really anything promising. You also have former NFLers and Florida teammates safety Tease Tabor and cornerback Quincy Wilson, who were both second rounders in the 2017 NFL Draft. You have running back Anthony McFarland, who was a 4th round pick and was formerly of the Steelers, as well as former 3rd round pick and New York Jet, Dallas Cowboy, Terrell Basham, who's going to be a pass rusher for them. So they have some former NFL talent on their team. It's just not really spread out as well as some of these other teams are, and a lot of these guys were failed former NFLers, and they aren't looking too promising for their XFL career, the UFL career. And probably their biggest addition, and which is kind of telling for this team, was their starting kicker, Donald De La Haye, who is also known as the YouTuber Destroying, who has like 5.8 million subscribers. So he does a lot of kicking videos, a lot of other like football competition videos, one-on-one, stuff like that. He got signed to them, and it's kind of their big selling point for tickets and things like that. Come see this YouTuber come and actually kick for a league after kicking on YouTube for YouTube Shorts and stuff for a long time. So Destroying is like their number one selling, player right now, and that being your team's kicker, that's kind of telling for what kind of talent you have on the roster there. So that's why the San Antonio Brahmas are number 8. And number 7, we have the Arlington Renegades, the reigning XFL champions. The only reason why they are that specifically is because they got into a playoffs because the 2 teams from both divisions made it, and they were in the really, really bad XFL division, the South, and they got in with a 4-6 record and just had a Linsanity run, winning 2 straight games in the playoffs and taking home the championship over the DC Defenders. Now, they added all USFL center Jake Lucina. They also added all XFL cornerback and wide receivers from the Houston Roughnecks and Najee Harris and Deontay Burnett, with Burnett, who was second in the NFL last season in touchdown receptions. They also have former NFL All-Pro pass rusher Vic Beasley Jr., who has been kind of a staple in these spring leagues and hasn't really lived up to what he did in NFL, which was leading the league in sacks for a season with 15.5, being an All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. So maybe he can turn it around for this team this year. They also brought back all XFL defensive tackle Devontae Lambert, who was their only reigning all XFL team member from the last year's championship team, as well as the starting quarterback who led them to the XFL championship in Luis Perez. So they're bringing back some pieces. They just weren't really that great of a team last year. And now they're bringing in some other guys like Deontay Burnett and Vic Beasley Jr., who may be able to add to this team. But I don't think the additions they're bringing in are going to turn that 4-6 team into something anything greater. They'll need another kind of a gamble shot to get into the playoffs and maybe make another Linsanity run towards the championship if they want any chance of repeating. And number 6 was my team last year in the XFL, which kind of had a hard fall off, and I'm switching. I had kind of like 2 teams, and I'm kind of going full hog on my other team now. But for my former favorite team in the XFL, the Houston Roughnecks at number 6, kind of a fall off here, lost some of their best players from last season to this season now, and it's just looking kind of rough for them. They do have all USFL team players with Justin Hall, who's a wide receiver, defensive end Adam Rodriguez, and then a 2022 all USFL defensive end Chris Odom, who in that season led the USFL with 12.5 sacks, which isn't anything to snuff at. They also have a former first-round linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers, Reuben Foster, who fell out of the NFL because of some domestic violence charges and has never got a chance to play there. He was on the Pittsburgh Maulers of the USFL recently, had an all-right season there, up and down. They also are looking to former NFL backup quarterback Reed Sinnett to be a capable starter for them. They do have Justin Hall and former Pittsburgh Maulers top receiver Isaiah Henney, so that should be a solid 1-2 receiver duo, but I'm not really expecting much from them when it comes to their offense. They lost out on their top running back last year, who was Max Borghi. They lost out on their top receiver, so they're kind of doing kind of a retool on the offense, similar to what the Brahmas are doing. They did have a capable defense last season, however, I do think they're in line to take a step back from being a playoff team like they were last year, so I don't believe the Houston Roughnecks are going to be nearly as good in the UFL as opposed to how they were in the XFL. At number 5, we have another USFL team in the Michigan Panthers. This team, this is where I can start seeing teams that have like an identity. The Michigan Panthers are going to have another year where they're going to have a stud defense, kind of like they did last year in USFL. They're going to be led by returning 2023 USFL sack leader and USFL all USFL team defensive end Breland Speaks, who is also going to be joined by all USFL linebacker Frank Gidna. They also have the 2023 USFL rushing leader Wes Hills as a new addition to their offense, and they're bringing back quarterback EJ Perry, who led them on some crucial wins to both get into the playoffs and in their one playoff game they did play last season. So they're going to hopefully parlay that into some more success with EJ Perry, and if he can't do it, kind of a spring ball staple in Brian Lewerke. He's coming in for a competition at that QB spot. They also have the receiving core, which I'm not super enthralled by. I think this is going to be a team that's going to win a lot of games with defense and running game with Wes Hills, and then, like I said, that stacked defense they're bringing back from their last season in the USFL. But they're going to come in with receivers led by the former best Mr. Irrelevant before Brock Purdy came along in Trey Quinn, who played for the Washington Commanders football team, etc. He's going to be coming in. He's like the most notable name on that receiver depth chart, so I don't know how much I trust those receivers, but I do think that this team is predicated by being built on very strong defense and a running game, and hopefully having EJ Perry guide the receiving core a little bit more and then be able to let it loose to complement that play style. So I have some questions about the Michigan Panthers passing game, but for right now, I do think they have an identity, a winning formula, and something that maybe will translate into the new season with the UFL, especially when it comes to being in a division with 2 of the top other 4 teams in the league. So hopefully they can step up and maybe steal away one of those top 2 spots in the conference. But that's going to be difficult because at number 4 we have another former USFL team, the Memphis Showboats. The Showboats brought in a couple key pieces, which is why I think they're slightly bit better than the Michigan Panthers. First off, they have returning players in all USFL offensive tackle Jaron Jones and defensive tackle John Atkins, so that's always good to have, returning all USFL players. And then they brought in 2 pivotal offensive pieces, which I think is what's going to carry them over the top of a team like Michigan Panthers, who are going to be a little more troubled offensively if you can stop their run. And that is, 1, Darius Victor at running back, who was a stud for the USFL the past 2 seasons. He was the New Jersey Generals, I believe, for both of those seasons. And last year, he was 3rd in the USFL in rushing yards and 4th in rushing touchdowns. But as well with that, to complement him, they have quarterback Case Cookus, who I believe should win that starting job for the Memphis Showboats. If you don't remember who Case Cookus was, in the first USFL championship won by the Birmingham Stallions, they played against the Philadelphia Stars, and Case Cookus was really the guy who carried the Stars to that championship game, and unfortunately broke his ankle in that game. He got signed, I believe, to the Eagles for a little bit, got cut, came back, and he played a little bit last season, but wasn't really himself. He's another year removed from that major ankle injury, so I think Case Cookus could come back, and him in the passing game there, complemented by Darius Victor, as well as just having the same consistent team they had for the past season from the USFL, should be good for them. And I feel like their offense is a little bit more dynamic and multi-dimensional than a team like the Michigan Panthers have. So that's why I have them slightly above the Panthers, who I do think is more of that defense and ground and pound, where Memphis is going to have that passing attack to complement a good running back in Darius Victor. Now, number 3 is going to be a bit of a surprise because this team was so good in the XFL last season. But I do have one issue with what happened with their roster, which is why they're at 3 instead of a team at like 2 or something like that, and that is the DC Defenders. They have the 2024 All XFL quarterback and Offensive Player of the Year, Jordan Ta'amu, coming back for them, which is great, and they also have an All XFL guard, D-end, and linebacker returning / being added to them. Continuing to look at that defense, they have 2023 All XFL cornerback Michael Joseph, and then they have 2 former NFL names you might remember in first-round picks, Garyon Conley and DeAndre Baker. Garyon Conley got knocked out of the league just from poor play. He was, I think, the 15th or 16th overall pick by the Raiders, and then he flashed a gun on Instagram and stuff. He did some really stupid things. So now he's trying to revamp his career here in the spring ball. As well as DeAndre Baker, he was the 31st overall pick by the Giants. That year they took the 3 first-round picks. And I do believe he'll have an opportunity to revamp his career. He got knocked out of the league because there was a whole... Well, he also wasn't playing well, but there was a whole thing about him with, like, showing up to somebody's birthday with a gun. Some really stupid off-the-field things for both these players, which is what ends them up here on top of their poor play in the NFL. So hopefully the talent that made them first-round picks is still evident. They can come in and combine with All-XFL cornerback Michael Joseph, who was just an absolute ball hawk last year, to really make one of the best secondaries in the XFL, or in the UFL, I'm sorry. But the reason they're at number 3 here, despite having all that defensive talent, having the reigning MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, and Jordan Ta'amu at quarterback, is because the whole offense they ran last year, it was a kind of that similar thing to Michigan Panthers, where it was a strong defense and a really strong running game, and then they were able to complement it with a passing game with Jordan Ta'amu. But that strong running game was really catalyzed by first overall pick running back Abram Smith, who was a running back out of Baylor, who I felt like was pretty dominant for a spring league. I wasn't that high on him when he was coming out with the draft for the NFL, but when he was drafted to the spring league, I was like, yeah, that's a guy who's going to dominate the spring league, and he did. But unfortunately, in offseason this year, he tore his ACL, so they are down their top rusher and top back in the league in general, in my opinion. Right now, it's looking like Cameron Harris, the former Miami Hurricane, is going to step in and be their replacement at starting running back, but they also have floated the idea of signing like guys like Adrian Peterson, or some other like flashy names to come in and be their starting running back. I'd probably wager a guess that like maybe Frank Gore's on that list. I don't know who they're talking to right now. At least for opening weekend, it's probably going to be Cameron Harris, who's going to be getting the majority of the carries there. So they're missing a pivotal part of what made that offense run last year, and what's going to be successful for them as laid out from last season when it comes to Abram Smith being out for the season. However, I do think that the team overall was pretty good. Jordan Ta'amu was the MVP for a reason, and I believe that offensive line and the scheming is going to be able to turn a guy like Cameron Harris into someone who can be a productive player for them. So it does nothing to take away from their defense and from the quarterback play they got from Jordan Ta'amu, but I do think that they may be a little bit worse off than they were last year, despite the additions in the secondary and having all these former All-XFL players on their roster. And at number 2, we have the back-to-back USFL champion Birmingham Stallions. A lot of people are going to be shocked that they're at 2 here. They won back-to-back, almost went undefeated last season, And it's like, well, I agree with that, but I feel like if they were in a joint league with that, like if this league existed last year, I don't know how likely would have been that they would have had it been so dominant. But let's talk about them real quick as to why I have them here all the way up at number 2. Obviously, they won the back-to-back titles. They have the USFL Championship MVP Deion Kane, the former Clemson wide receiver, still on the roster. They added former third-round pick and Green Bay Packers wide receiver, also former Clemson wide receiver, Amari Rodgers. They have Benjamin Victor and Kevin Austin, who was a former receiver from the Notre Dame Irish that I really liked coming out of the draft as like a complimentary piece. So they have a really elite receiver core, and they also added all USFL tight end Jay Sternberger, who led the USFL in receiving touchdowns last season. So they just keep adding to that passing offense. They're also adding somebody back from injury that they didn't have all of last year when they won the championship in Scooby Wright, the linebacker, who's been another kind of spring football staple and really good player at this level. And then in the redispersal draft, they drafted all USFL offensive tackle Calvin Ashley. And I just think they're just adding pieces to really make themselves a better team this year. Where I have questions is at the quarterback position. I know Jamar Smith was good for them and led them to the title last year. I just don't know how he's going to stack up with the other quarterbacks that are in this now combined league. The UFL had some good or the XFL had some good quarterbacks that are returning back to the UFL this year, including the one that's going to be on our number 1 team, which I'm assuming you figured out at this point. But there also is the potential that Matt Corral could take over as the starting quarterback, former third-round pick of the Carolina Panthers, went to New England Patriots, was a really good quarterback for the Ole Miss Rebels. Yeah, I believe that's it. And he might be able to come in and add more of a higher upside to this team than Jamar Smith. I'm not really familiar with Jamar Smith's game entirely. I just looked at his stats and watched a little bit of the game recaps from the USFL, and this is just what I'm recalling from that. So maybe he's going to be head and shoulders better than what Matt Corral can provide. Regardless, I do think that there are some question marks when it comes to this team being so dominant in the USFL, which I do believe was the weaker of the two leagues prior to the merger. And now they're coming in and trying to have to stack up against the other XFL teams, and they'll see if they're just as dominant as they were in the USFL in this new combined, more highly competitive league. And then, of course, at number 1, my team for this year. I'm planting my ground right now. Plant my flag in the ground. I love this team. This is my second team. Last year was the Battlehawks and the Roughnecks. So the St. Louis Battlehawks are number 1 for me in the UFL initial power rankings, as well as this preview for this video. They have just returned 3-time Offensive Player of the Week, Adrian McCarron, as their quarterback, somebody who obviously loved playing in the Spring Football League for the XFL, and was a really good quarterback at this level, despite being like a backup level quarterback at the NFL. He has 2 wide receivers that were both on the All-XFL team, and Hakeem Butler, and one of my favorite players, Ja'Cour Pearson, who was on the Seattle Sea Dragons with Ben DiNucci last season. They also have an All-XFL guard, tackle, corner, and returner. So they have really star-studded offense when it comes to offensive line and playmakers for Adrian McCarron. One thing that I was really buying into was that they brought in my boy Max Borghi at running back for them, from former Houston Roughnecks running back and Washington State running back that I really liked in the draft process. However, he's stepping away from football right now to go after different ventures. So they lost out on having that kind of dynamic running back piece. But they did bring in former NFL running back and Clemson running back Wayne Gallman, who, while not a stud in any sense, he's not Benjamin Victor or Abram Smith, as we talked about previously. He is a capable running back who has had playing time in the NFL for the guys like the Giants, and will be a complementary piece to this elite passing attack that they're going to have in St. Louis. As well, on top of all of that, and they had a decent defense last year, but they added a big piece in the 2023 All-XFL linebacker and Defensive Player of the Year, Pita Tauamopenu, is how I believe you say that. So not only did they have a stud defense last year, they're adding the Defensive Player of the Year from that league. They're bringing in all these All-XFL players on their offense to really complement Adrian McCarron, who, despite not winning Offensive Player of the Year, which I feel like it was him, Ja'Cour Pearson, and Jordan Ta'amu and Abram Smith up for that award last year, in my own personal opinion. And the fact that they now have 2 of those players on the team, I do think that this offense is going to be electric. I think the defense has greatly improved. Their offensive line is probably one of the best in the league because they have all team players at guard, tackle, and the rest of their position groups aren't bad at all. So I do think that the Battlehawks are probably the best encompassing elements of all of like what the XFL was. They have some of the best players from that league, and I feel like that was the stronger league than the USFL, which is why I have them slightly above the Birmingham Stallions, despite not being the champions of that previous league. So It's kind of a logical fallacy, but this is a totally new season, totally new league in general. We're going to see how this all plays out. If you're excited for spring football, which I am, I'm glad they gave us a little break. Instead of going immediately the weekend after the Super Bowl, they gave us a month off. I'm super excited. Tell me how excited you are in the comments. Tell me who you think the number one team in this league is going to be at the end of the season, who's going to win the championship, who's going to come out of each individual conference and meet there. And yeah, I'll be excited to read all of that, and I'll see you in the next one.